Cluedo, known as Clue in North America, is a murder mystery game for 3 to 6 players, devised by Anthony E.Pratt from Birmingham, England, and currently published by the American game and toy company Hasbro. The object of the game is to determine who murdered the game's victim, where the crime took place, and which weapon was used. Each player assumes the role of one of the 6 suspects and attempts to deduce the correct answer by strategically moving around a game board representing the rooms of a mansion and collecting clues about the circumstances of the murder from the other players. Numerous games, books, and a film have been released as part of the Cluedo franchise. Several spin-offs have been released featuring various extra characters, weapons and rooms, or different gameplay. The original game is marketed as the classic detective game, while the various spin-offs are all distinguished by different slogans. In 2008, Cluedo, Discover the Secrets was created as a modern spin-off, but was criticized in the media and fans of the original game. Cluedo, the classic mystery game, was then introduced in 2012, returning to Pratt's classic formula but also adding several variations. History. In 1944, Anthony E.Pratt, an English musician, applied for a patent of his invention of a murder mystery-themed game. Originally named Murder, the game was originally invented as a new game to play in bomb shelters. Shortly thereafter, Pratt and his wife, Elva Pratt, who had helped in designing the game, presented it to Waddington's executive, Norman Watson, who immediately purchased it and provided its trademark name of Cluedo. Though the patent was granted in 1947, due to post-war shortages, the game was not officially launched until 1949, when the game was simultaneously licensed to Parker Brothers in the United States for publication, where it was renamed Clue, along with other minor changes. There were several differences between the original game concept and that initially published in 1949. In particular, Pratt's original design calls for 10 characters, one of whom was to be designated the victim by random drawing prior to the start of the game. These 10 included the eliminated Mr. Brown, Mr. Gold, Miss Gray, and Mrs. Silver. The characters of Nurse White and Colonel Yellow were renamed Mrs. White and Colonel Mustard for the actual release. The game allowed for play of up to 8 remaining characters, providing for 9 suspects in total. Originally there were 11 rooms, including the eliminated gun room and cellar. In addition, there were 9 weapons, including the unused bomb, syringe, shillelagh, fireplace, poker, and the later used axe and poison. Some of these unused weapons and characters appeared later in spin-off versions of the game. Some gameplay aspects were different as well. Notably, the remaining playing cards were distributed into the rooms to be retrieved, rather than dealt directly to the players. Players also had to land on another player in order to make suggestions about that player's character through the use of special counter tokens. And once exhausted, a player could no longer make suggestions. There were other minor differences, all of which were later updated by the game's initial release and remain essentially unchanged in the standard classic detective game editions of the game. Equipment. The game consists of a board which shows the rooms, corridors and secret passages of an English country house called Tudor Mansion. Although previously named variously as Tudor Close or Tudor Hall, and in some editions Body Manor or Body Mansion, more recent editions have restored the name Tudor Mansion to the mansion, and say the mansion is in Hampshire, England in the year 1926. The game box also includes several colored playing pieces to represent characters, miniature murder weapon props, 1 or 2 6-sided dice, 3 sets of cards, each set describing the aforementioned rooms, characters and weapons. Solution cards envelope to contain 1 card from each set of cards, and a detective's notes pad on which are printed lists of rooms, weapons and characters, so players can keep detailed notes during the game. Suspects depending on edition. The playing pieces are typically made of colored plastic, shaped like chess pawns, or character figurines. Occasionally they are made from wood or pewter. The standard edition of Cluedo comes with 6 basic tokens representing these original characters. Miss Scarlet is a red piece. Professor Plum is a purple piece. Mrs. Peacock is a blue piece. Reverend Green is a green piece. Colonel Mustard is a yellow piece. Mrs. White is a white piece. Weapons. The playing tokens are typically made out of unfinished pewter, with the exception of the rope, which may be made of plastic or string depending on edition. Special editions have included gold-plated, brass-finished and sterling silver versions, which have appeared in a variety of designs. Candlestick, dagger, lead pipe, revolver. Beginning in 1972, all editions typically now represent an Allen and Thurber pepperbox revolver. Rope, spanner. Rooms. There are 9 rooms in the mansion where the murder can take place, laid out in circular fashion on the game board, separated by pathways overlaid by playing spaces. Each of the 4 corner rooms contains a secret passage that leads to the room on the opposite diagonal corner of the map. The center room is inaccessible to the players, but contains the solution envelope, and is not otherwise used during gameplay. Colored start spaces encircle the outer perimeter which correspond to each player's suspect token. Each character starts at the corresponding colored space. Denotes secret passages to opposite corner rules. At the beginning of play, 3 cards, 1 suspect, 1 weapon, and 1 room card, are chosen at random and put into a special envelope, so that no one can see them. These cards represent the facts of the case. The remainder of the cards are distributed among the players. Players are instructed to assume the token suspect nearest them. In older versions, play begins with Miss Scarlet and proceeds clockwise. In modern versions, all players roll the dice and the highest total starts the game and then proceeds clockwise. Players roll the dice and move along the board's corridor spaces, or into the rooms accordingly. The aim is to deduce the details of the murder, that is, the cards in the envelope. There are 6 characters, 6 murder weapons and 9 rooms, leaving the players with 324 possibilities. While determining the details of the murder, players announce suggestions to the other players. For example, I suggest it was Professor Plum, in the hall, with the revolver. The player's token must be in the room they suggest. Suggestions may not be made in the corridors. The token of the player suggested as the murderer as well as the weapon suggested are moved into the room, if not already present. The player to the left of the suggesting player must then disprove the suggestion, if they can, by showing the suggesting player one of the cards containing one of the suggestion components, as this proves that the card cannot be in the envelope. This is done in secret so that the other players cannot see which card is being used to disprove the suggestion. If a player has more than one such card, they may select which one to show. If the first player to the left of the suggesting player does not have any of the 3 cards needed to disprove the suggestion, the next player clockwise must disprove the suggestion, if possible, and so on clockwise until either the suggesting player is shown a card that disproves their suggestion, or each player advises that they cannot disprove the suggestion. The suggesting player's turn then ends. The suggesting player does not advise the other players whether they hold any of the 3 cards. Once a player has sufficiently narrowed the solution, that player can make an accusation. According to the rules, when you think you have worked out which 3 cards are in the envelope, you may, on your turn, make an accusation and name any 3 elements you want. Players may name any room. The accusing player checks the validity of the accusation by checking the cards, keeping them concealed from other players. If they've made an incorrect accusation, they play no further part in the game except to reveal cards secretly to one of the remaining players when required to do so to disprove suggestions. Also, according to the rules, if, after making a false accusation, your character pawn is blocking a door, you must move it into that room, so that other players may enter. If the player made a correct accusation, the solution cards are shown to the other players and the game ends. A player can use the piece representing the murderer. This does not affect the gameplay. The object of the game is still to be the first to make the correct accusation. All editions of the current version of the game are advertised as a 3 to 6 player game only. Traditionally, the UK version was advertised for 2 to 6 players. The problem with 2-player games under these rules is that each player has half of the remaining cards, and thus anything shared easily gives the game away. A player could potentially win after making a single suggestion in which the opponent does not have any of the cards for strategy. Though gameplay is relatively straightforward as described above, various strategies allow players to maximize their opportunities to make suggestions and therefore gain the advantage of accumulating information faster. As alluded to above, blocking the entrance to a room is one way to prevent an opponent from entering a desired room and making a suggestion. Choice of playing piece. The first opportunity is in choosing the initial playing piece. Mrs. Peacock has an immediate advantage of being one space closer to the first room than any of the other players. Professor Plum can move to the study, and then take the secret passage to the kitchen, the hardest room to get to. Traditionally, Miss Scarlet had the advantage of moving first. This has been eliminated with the implementation of the high roll rule. Navigating the board. The next opportunity is choice of initial rooms to enter. Again, Mrs. Peacock has an advantage in that she is closest to the conservatory, a corner room with a secret passage, enabling a player on their turn to move immediately to another room and make a suggestion without rolling the dice. Miss Scarlet has a similar advantage with the lounge. Making as many suggestions as possible gives a player an advantage to gain information. Therefore, moving into a new room as frequently as possible is one way to meet this goal. Players should make good use of the secret passages. Following the shortest path between rooms then is a good choice, even if a player already holds the card representing that room in their hand. As mentioned earlier, blocking passage of another player prevents them from attaining rooms from which to make suggestions. Various single-space tracks on the board can therefore become traps, which are best avoided by a player when planning a path from room to room. Making suggestions. Each player begins the game with 3 to 6 cards in his hand. Keeping track of which cards are shown to each player is important in deducing the solution. Detective notes are supplied with the game to help make this task easier. The pads can keep not only a history of which cards are in a player's hand, but also which cards have been shown by another player. It can also be useful in deducing which cards the other players have shown one another. A player makes a suggestion to learn which cards may be eliminated from suspicion. However, in some cases it may be advantageous for a player to include one of their own cards in a suggestion. This technique can be used for both forcing a player to reveal a different card as well as misleading other players into believing a specific card is suspect. Therefore, moving into a room already held in the player's hand may work to their advantage. Suggestions may also be used to thwart a player's opponent. Since every suggestion results in a suspect token being relocated to the suggested room, a suggestion may be used to prevent another player from achieving their intended destination, preventing them from suggesting a particular room, especially if that player appears to be getting close to a solution. Note-taking. One reason the game is enjoyed by many ages and skill levels is that the complexity of note-taking can increase as a player becomes more skillful. An amateur may simply mark off the cards he has been shown. More advanced players will keep track of who has and who does not have a particular card, possibly with the aid of an additional grid. Expert players may keep track of each suggestion made, knowing that the player who answers it must have at least one of the cards named, which one can be deduced by later events. One can also keep track of which cards a given player has seen, in order to minimize information revealed to that player or to read into that player's suggestions. Additions. Parker Brothers and Waddingtons each produced their own unique editions between 1949 and 1992. Hasbro purchased both companies in the early 1990s and continued to produce unique editions for each market until 2002-2003, when the current edition of ʻkluːdoʊ was first released. At this time, Hasbro produced a unified product across markets. The game was then localized with regional differences in spelling and naming conventions. During Cluedo's long history, 8 unique Clue editions were published in North America, including miniaturized travel editions. However, only 3 distinct editions of Cluedo were released in the UK, the longest of which lasted 47 years from its introduction in 1949 until its first successor in 1996. The 8th North America and 4th UK editions constitute the current shared game design. International versions occasionally developed their own unique designs for specific editions. However, most drew on the designs and art from either the US or UK editions, and in some cases mixing elements from both, while localizing others, specifically suspect portraits. While the suspect's appearance and interior design of Dr. Black's Mr. Body's mansion changed with each edition, the weapons underwent relatively minor changes, with the only major redesign occurring in the 4th 1972 US edition, which was adopted by the 2nd 1996 UK edition and remains the standard configuration across all classic detective game versions since. The artwork for the previous US editions tended to reflect the current popular style at the time they were released. The earlier UK editions were more artistically stylized themes. From 1972 on, the US editions presented lush box cover art depicting the 6 suspects in various candid poses within a room of the mansion. The UK would finally adopt this style only in its 3rd release in 2000, prior to which Cluedo boxes depicted basic representations of the contents. Such lavish box art illustrations have become a hallmark of the game, since copied for the numerous licensed variants which pay homage to Clue. Marketing Cluedo was originally marketed as The Great New Detective Game, upon its launch in 1949 in North America, and quickly made a deal to license The Great New Sherlock Holmes Game from the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle estate. Advertising at the time suggested players would take on the guise of Sherlock Holmes following the path of the criminal. However, no depictions of Holmes appears in the advertising or on the box. By 1950, the game was simply marketed as The Great Detective Game until the 1960s, at which time it became Parker Brothers Detective Game. But the association with Sherlock Holmes was far from over. With the launch of the US 1972 edition, a television commercial showed Holmes and Watson engaged in a particularly competitive game, adjusting with the times. In 1979 US TV commercials, a detective resembling a bumbling Inspector Clouseau from the popular Pink Panther film franchise, looks for clues. In 1986, the marketing slogan added "Classic Detective Game," which persists through the last 2002-2003 edition. In the UK, Cluedo did not start using the Great Detective Game marketing slogan until the mid-1950s, which it continued using it until the 2000 edition when it adopted the "Classic Detective Game" slogan. However, in the mid-1950s, Waddingtons also adopted a Sherlock Holmes-type detective to adorn their box covers for a brief time. Though unlike the US editions, there was no acknowledgement that the character was actually the famous detective. In the 1980s, as in the US, Sherlock Holmes also appeared in TV advertising of the time, along with other classic detectives such as Sam Spade. Notable editions: Cluedo 50th Anniversary, also released as Clue 50th Anniversary. This standard edition came in a deluxe format with the option to play with an extra murder weapon, a bottle of poison. This edition was also issued in a miniaturized Cluedo European travel version. Struzan provided artwork for the game, which was originally created for the US 1996 edition and additionally used for the limited gift edition and the US Clue card game, Clue Nostalgia Edition. Hasbro began offering a retro nostalgia edition of the game, essentially a reissue of the 1963 design in a wooden box. A custom version of the game was also released in the US by Restoration Hardware as Wooden Box Clue with different cover art. In the UK it was released under the ʻkluːdoʊ brand, and was an official reissue of the original 1949 Waddington's design. Clue Vintage Edition, also released as ʻkluːdoʊ Vintage Edition. Hasbro reformatted the Nostalgia Edition into a vintage bookshelf collection along with a series of other popular board games. In the ʻkluːdoʊ version, they continued to use the 1963 design and adapted it for the UK market for the first time with localized characters and naming conventions.